So I got a little surprise in the mail a little while ago, and when I got it, I saw the last 10 years of my life flash before my eyes. I got the official certificate, I got the small stamp and the big stamp, and I also got the cool stamp. And when I opened the box, it was pretty anticlimactic. But I have been working towards this moment for the past 10 years. So today I thought I'd reflect on my journey to become a licensed architect and share some of the life lessons I've learned. We'll cover everything from education to career to YouTube to money. And I'm also going to try to answer some common questions that I get from you guys. This video is sponsored by Grammarly. We'll talk about them later. And this video is going to be a little bit longer than usual. I mean, I am going to be covering the past 10 years of my life. So grab a cup of tea and get cozy. So let's start all the way back to when I was in high school. I actually had no idea what I wanted to study when I was in high school. I was interested in a bunch of different things, but nothing really in particular. So I was gonna apply to business school, arts and sciences and just see what happened. But I did really love painting. And at my high school, we had this art room that we could use whenever we wanted to. So I used to go in there and paint during my free time and after school. And one day I was talking to one of our student teachers, Megan, and she was like, you should apply to architecture school. And I really didn't know anything about architecture back then, but the more I looked into it, it sounded pretty interesting. And well, I also wanted to try moving to a different city, and I saw that Toronto had a couple of architecture schools. So I decided to put together a portfolio, and I ended up getting into Ryerson University. And I actually really ended up enjoying architecture. I get so many questions from, I think those of you probably still in high school, about like, how do I know what to study in university? How do I know if I'm going to be any good at architecture? And I guess the lesson I want to give you here is just kind of trust in serendipity and plant the seeds of those serendipitous encounters. The fact that this student teacher happened to be at our school that week and that she just happened to notice me doing these paintings, you could say it's like random luck, but according to Steven Johnson, serendipity, yes, it needs unlikely collisions and discoveries, but it also needs something to anchor those discoveries. And if I hadn't been sitting in the art room making these paintings, Megan probably would have never noticed that I might be interested in architecture. And I think it's really good to plan out your life, but when something happens, like something unexpected comes along that pulls your interest, don't be so quick to dismiss it because it wasn't a part of your original plan. This is also a response to another very common question I get, which is, oh, I like drawing and math. So do you think I'm gonna like architecture? First of all, I don't know. I can't tell you what to do, but you know, you can think about this question your whole life, but I have so many friends and like cousins who thought they were going to be doctors, and then they went to medical school and they hated it and they dropped out. Because in the end, you can stress out about this and you can take personality tests and all that, but in the end, you really don't know what you're going to like until you try it. So I got into architecture school and I moved to Toronto by myself when I was just 18 years old. And it was all very exciting and also very scary, but mostly very exciting. And I think most first year students will experience something similar to this. For me, it was kind of like seeing the world for the first time. I think I was always a very sensitive kid and I always appreciated beauty, but architecture, it was just the first time I learned why things are beautiful. And, you know, it is pretty mind-blowing. You learn that every object and every space you've come across has meaning, and there's like poetry behind it, and there's like intent behind concrete or stone or wood. and like learning about the idea of phenomenology. And it's all kind of like all of a sudden you have this new language and now you understand and you can express the world in a completely different way. So yeah, first year was very exciting, but my excitement did not really translate into good projects or good grades. I was actually pretty behind a lot of the other students because a lot of them actually knew that they wanted to go into architecture pretty early on. And so when they were in high school, they were taking like drafting classes, and some of them already knew how to use AutoCAD and like 3D modeling. They knew what a plan and section was, which I didn't. Needless to say, my grades were not the best. I kind of had to learn like all of this new software on my free time, and it took me a painfully long time to do things. And I was just very lost and confused, and I had so many moments where I really, really wanted to drop out. But even when I thought it was never gonna get better, and even when I thought I was like the worst student ever, things did start to take a turn. And I think the lesson here is pain and reflection equals growth. This is something I learned from the book Principles by Ray Dalio. If you don't know him, he's the founder of like the biggest hedge fund in the world, Bridgewater, and with like $150 billion in assets. And he basically attributes his success to being able to look at the world in terms of systems and principles. And one of these principles is, pain plus reflection equals progress. For me too, the first couple of years were really, really painful. But when I look back in terms of my growth trajectory, I think that my first year alone was probably the year when I experienced a massive amount of growth. And when I compare that to times in my life where I was kind of coasting, that's, I think, when I grew the least, because I was the least challenged and I was the least satisfied with my life and my work. And during that time, actually, like, I'm someone who really values personal growth. So I spent a lot of time reading like self-development books, but reading or listening to podcasts, it's not a painful experience. And the lessons, they never really changed me in a big way. But struggling alone isn't going to get you that far. I've seen lots of students who struggle from day one all the way to their 4th, 6th, like 7th year of school. And I think a lot of it has to do with this very unhelpful advice, which is practice makes perfect. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Every time you do something, you should be reflecting on how you can do that thing better and faster and more efficiently. Because the way you get better is not to work harder, but to build a system to do that thing better. So as you're struggling, constantly be thinking about how can I do this thing better? So back to my journey. So after I finished my bachelor's, I took a year off. I moved back to Vancouver and I worked at a boutique firm in Gastown. It was a really good experience, but for the most part, it was pretty terrifying. I kind of got thrown in the deep end, and on my very first month, like I had to go meet a client and I was in charge of doing like a permit set. Like, hello, what is a permit? I pretty much didn't understand anything about the process or like the building code, and it was a pretty big struggle. And one day I realized that I had made a pretty big mistake when I was submitting a permit that potentially delayed the client from opening his restaurant for like a couple of months. And that night, and actually that entire week, I couldn't sleep at all because I was so scared and I thought we were gonna get into a lawsuit. But when the client came in for a meeting, seriously, like to my utter surprise, the principal just talked it over with him and it was all okay somehow. So that taught me a pretty big lesson, which was that, first of all, things that feel monumental to you in the moment, it can be relatively small to other people, especially when you're just starting out. When you talk to more senior people who've been around for longer, you will very quickly realize that they've come across bigger and much, much, much worse mistakes. Mistakes are just opportunities to learn. It's a part of the job, and you just learn from it and you just move on. And secondly, and this is a big one, so sometimes it's about how you phrase it. When you realize that you've made a mistake, think for a second about how you want to communicate that and how you can solve the problem. So before, when I make a mistake, I would get super stressed out and just super scared and be like, holy cow, this happened and this happened and this happened. And oh my God, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. But people walk around with their own mistakes and their own stress, and they don't need that extra baggage in their lives. And if you want to be valuable, you want to be a problem solver, not a problem creator. I found it's best to present the facts objectively and always propose a solution. Like, this and this and this happened, but we can do this and this. And that's much more proactive, and you're not just relying on other people to solve the problem for you. And it also gets your head thinking in a way that in the future, you probably will not make this mistake again. But if you have to relay this information in an email, it does add another layer of difficulty, which is why tools like Grammarly can be really helpful. Grammarly is an all-in-one writing tool that helps you communicate your ideas clearly and effectively by giving you comprehensive feedback across different platforms. Grammarly does have a free version with basic grammar and spelling suggestions, but upgrading to their premium version will actually save you so much time with their features like tone transforms, full sentence rewrite features, which help you write more clearly by suggesting different words or repositioning words. And also with their tone detector, which has been super helpful for me because sometimes when you're just trying to get stuff done, you might not realize that you sound like an and we're in the business of relationships, so these things really do matter. Grammarly is free to download, and it's easy to integrate with your everyday tools like Gmail or Google Docs. Just the other day, I was getting pushback from one of our consultants, basically telling us that they weren't gonna do any more work because it was outside of their scope. And I basically had to tell them that, yeah, you're right, but we reduced your work in a lot of other areas. Plus, you were a month late on delivering your work. So it would be great if you completed the work, please and thank you. And Grammarly really helped me craft this email in a way that was concise, professional, and stern. And because navigating these tricky situations are a really big part of an architect's job, having the writing assistant can save you so much time. Get through those emails quicker by keeping it concise and confident and in the right tone with Grammarly. Go to grammarly.com/Dammy to sign up for a free account and get 20% off Grammarly Premium to help you work more efficiently. So back to my journey. So that experience working for this firm after my bachelor's was such an eye-opener for me. And I couldn't believe that after 4 years of school, I was still such a snowflake. And I really felt like I had to become an architect as fast as possible. And I just felt really impatient. So I went right back to my master's. And here I kind of want to try to answer the question of, is a university education worth it? So the beginning of my master's was actually a little bit disappointing. I wanted to learn more about working in the field, but there were only a few courses that actually talked about the practice of architecture. But it did eventually get better. And looking back, my master's was probably the most rewarding and intellectually stimulating times of my life because basically day in and day out, you get to work on a topic that you're interested in, and with constant feedback from professors who have an incredible depth of knowledge in this area. And you might not be getting practical hard skills like learning Revit or spec writing, but you're learning all of these meta skills like writing, designing, researching, presenting, and learning to learn. That's a pretty big one. That you can bring all of these skills into a lot of other aspects of your life and not just into architecture. And I think these skills have helped me start my YouTube channel. It's helped me build an audience. And if you look at a lot of the top architects, their skills aren't Revit or spec writing. It's architects who can communicate their value and communicate something that's very elusive into something tangible. You have to remember that lots of people invest time and money for hard skills. I mean, it makes sense, right? They're typically directly employable, and usually it's directly attached to a monetary value. But hard skills are actually kind of temporary with changes in technology and the industry, while meta skills are actually permanent skills that's going to make you more adaptable and more resilient wherever you go. So one lesson from this would be invest in your meta skills as much as your hard skills. But I am still not answering the question of, is a university education worth it? Because yeah, you're right. If you wanted to, you could get these meta skills by doing an online course or even from working for a firm, right? But if you want to be an architect right now, these are hard requirements. You can see my video where I describe the step-by-step process to become a licensed architect. And I think sometimes because it's a hard requirement, it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking that this is just something you have to get through. And I think that mindset can hinder you from fully taking advantage of your education. I think it's a really subtle shift in mindset, but when you think about your education as a long-term goal and a long-term investment in yourself, you're going to be asking more questions, you're going to be actively engaging your profs, and you're going to be reflecting on your process and like trying to improve whenever you make a mistake, trying to understand why you got a bad grade, and trying to figure out why certain things worked and like why certain things didn't work. And if there's one thing we should be investing in, it is our education. And so the lesson from this would be, see education as a long-term investment in yourself, not a requirement. And use this time to start building systems for your workflow so that it can benefit you down the road. Okay, so I'm officially through the school phase of my life. But if you have any other questions about that, feel free to ask me in the comments and I'll make sure to answer them. How do I decide what firm to work for? So once I finished my master's, I felt like I still didn't really know anything about being an architect. So my goal was to fill in those gaps in my knowledge as fast as possible. And I really wanted to learn how to navigate around code and zoning. I wanted to learn how to build and the construction process and how to work with contractors and clients. And I also wanted to learn how an architecture business works. And basically all the things that were covered in like one course in school and just not nearly enough to understand the whole process. So I applied to several firms and I got an offer from two firms. One of them was a larger firm with bigger projects, and they offered me not a lot, but a little bit more money, which was a lot for me at that time. And the other firm was a smaller firm, only 3 people with smaller projects. And they were kind of, I guess, total opposites. And as a young grad, I was obviously more tempted to take the job from the larger firm. You know, they have more people, they have more resources, and it's a little cooler, it's a little fancier. But I just asked around a lot from some of the older grads. And I ended up taking the job from the smaller firm for a little bit less money. And one of the deciding factors was actually during the interview at the small firm, one of the partners, he couldn't make it. And so there was an intern that actually took part in the interview process, which kind of made an impression on me. He said both the partners are really invested in his learning, and there's really good work-life balance, and they really help you get your hours. So I ended up going there, and luckily it turned out to be a good fit. And I know that I'm lucky that this doesn't happen all the time. I learned so much during my 3 years there, and they really helped me get my architecture license within 3 years, which is like pretty much the shortest amount of time you can take, which obviously results in, ta-da, more money. This lesson is a response to another common question, which is, how do I know what type of firm I should work for? And it's actually a really great question, and something you should give a bit of thought to, because early in your career, the firm that you work at, it is gonna kind of shape you, like who you become as an architect and the trajectory of your career. So my advice here would be try to follow people, not money or companies or not even projects. And let me elaborate. Don't follow money, because your starting salary is going to be relatively minuscule wherever you go. So in the grander scheme of things, that extra few grand isn't really going to make a monumental impact in your life. You want to invest in your growth, and you want to grow faster and try to get that license early on, because you're going to be able to contribute more to a firm and eventually have a much more meaningful increase in your income over the years. And when I say don't follow companies or even projects, I'm not saying like don't go for a high quality firm, because you should. Like, you are going to be exposed to better processes and better projects, and it's going to give you a better portfolio. But I say this because I know tons of people who worked 5 to 10 years just doing schematic design, DD for a big company. And over that time span, like, you could have gotten licensed. And, you know, the firm in the end is a business, and it's easier for them to keep you in one phase of a project. So no matter how many cool projects you're working on, if your firm doesn't have the culture of mentoring, and if they're not invested in your growth, it can be tough to grow as an architect. So you want to try to find a balance. But even though I had this great learning environment, the process of becoming an architect was actually really tough. And I came pretty close to quitting several times. It was tough, and being an intern, you don't always get to do the most fun stuff. And the process of collecting hours and writing exams and all of that was insanely tedious. And that's why I have a lot of sympathy for interns, and also just like the general negativity around the profession. Like, if you don't believe me, just check any online architecture forum. It's terrible. But at some point in this journey, I read Grit by Angela Duckworth, which kind of gave me a totally new perspective on things. And I would highly recommend this book for all of you if you haven't read it. She says enthusiasm is common and endurance is rare. And I think it's really easy to say, okay, this is too hard. I'm done with this thing, and I'm gonna go to this new shiny thing. But she says true happiness and fulfillment comes from getting really good at something and slowly becoming an expert in things. Learning new things is hard, and making mistakes is really hard. And being an intern and working on an intern salary, that's really hard. It was really hard for me. But once you gain more experience, things become easier. And for me, I really started to love my job. So this is the next lesson, which is like, stay persistent and don't give up, and try to tune out the negativity. Because I find that in general, unhappy people are the most vocal and they're the ones who complain the most, while in general, like happy and satisfied people, just continue living their lives. So a little while after I finished my requirements, this was in March 2020, I applied for my license and I ended up leaving the firm that I was at. I was actually moonlighting while I was working at this firm, and my client was the owner of this franchise bakery that was growing really, really fast. And I'll make a video on this. And they had plans to expand all over the world. It's the type of work that's not really glamorous, but it's also not a lot of work. It's not as exciting because they kind of have their own branding and they want you to basically replicate like similar designs for each location. Yeah, it's relatively easy. It's good money and you can work on your own time. And at that time, like since I'd finished all my requirements, I just wanted to take a break and think about what I want to do next. And so I booked a yoga retreat in Mexico that I've been wanting to go on for a really long time. And I was planning on doing the work remotely and just like having a nice time. This is, of course, when COVID happened. And this was a pretty big hit for my client, and most of their projects ended up getting canceled. And of course, my yoga retreat got canceled as well. At that point, I didn't have a job and nobody was hiring at that time. This was really scary for me because I kind of felt like I'd made a humongous mistake. Like I quit a good stable job at a good firm and I just had a lot of anxiety and I also had a lot of time. Not great combinations. That's when I started thinking about what could I do to make money while using my skill sets and interests. Of course, my skill is designing, storytelling, and being an architect. And at that time, the YouTube algorithm, probably because a lot of people were having the same problems as me, it fed me this video by Ali Abdal talking about how he was able to make money from YouTube. That was when I made my first video about the design process. And if you want to check it out, I'll leave it right here. That's when I started my YouTube channel. Some of the videos ended up getting a lot of traction. And the thing that eventually landed me another job as an architect at another firm. And the lesson I learned from this experience is that when you don't know what to do, just go back to your foundations. I say this because when I was starting the YouTube channel, the advice that was given to me like over and over and over again was to not make videos about architecture and to make videos about something else that would interest the largest and widest, broadest audience possible. When I really sat down and like tried to list out the things that I was interested in and the things that I was good at, I just couldn't get myself to make videos about food or fashion or productivity. So I just made videos about design and architecture, and somehow it found an audience. And I think if you sit down and look at your existing skills and your interests, you can have something that's unique and you end up creating your own niche. I think in that first year of COVID, and I think this is probably a pretty common experience, that first year, I learned so much about myself, like what I liked and what I didn't like and what my values were and what I was good at. So like I was saying before, a couple months into the pandemic in September of 2020, I actually landed a job that specialized in interior design, tenant improvements, interior fit outs, and I got brought on as the architect to help like navigate the building code and zoning bylaws, all the legal stuff, and also to help out on some of their more complex projects. And professionally, I thought this was a great move for me because, I could start to build a niche in this area, especially because most of my previous projects had been smaller projects and renovations. This was partially motivated by my fear of running out of time and dying. I'm going to get to a point where I, need to have kids and have a family and where I can't focus on my career as much. And so I always thought it's better to start building a niche early. So that was my thinking at the time. But the more I was there, I kept feeling like maybe I'd picked a specialty a little too early in my career. I'd only been working in the field for like 3-4 years, which is like totally an infant in this industry. And ultimately, I felt like this was a time for me to be like trying out different projects of different scales and be learning from more senior architects. So that was a massive miscalculation on my part. And after about half a year, I ended up leaving that firm, which was really hard because they'd kind of made this role for me there, and I built really good relationships with a lot of the people, and I just ended up disappointing a lot of people there. But again, this was another time when I really learned a lot about myself. First, that I really don't like to disappoint people, and I really don't like conflict. But I think the biggest lesson from all of this is that you kind of just have to be ruthless about saying no to things that don't really align with your goals. And you will make miscalculations and you will disappoint people along the way. And I think you just need to be okay with that. It was the same with my previous firm, actually. It was very hard for me to leave because I developed all these good relationships with these people. But, if you know it's not the right fit for you anymore and that your goals don't really align with what other people want for you, then it's not really in anyone's interest to have you around. You just have to be your own cheerleader and make those hard choices, because nobody's really going to do that for you. If you can identify and seek out exactly what you want and are okay with disappointing people from time to time, in the end, you're going to be happier in all aspects of life, and you're going to be surrounded by people who are happier. So anyways, I'm at a different firm now. I'm super, super happy with the work I'm doing, and my goals are aligned with what the firm's able to offer. But even after getting my license, I still feel like a newbie in this field. So I'll leave you with my final lesson, which is be an active, lifelong learner. The human species is biologically hardwired to evolve, so growth is the key to a satisfying life. When I was making the decision on whether I should stay or leave my last firm, I was essentially deciding between, do I want to niche down and develop this thing that I already kind of have an expertise in? Or do I want to jump into something more foreign and learn to work with different types of buildings? There's no right or wrong answer, and your answer might change depending on where you are in life, and in your career or in your financial situation. But I think no matter what situation you're in, there's always an opportunity for learning, and growth should be one of the biggest factors in your decision making. Anyways, I feel very, very, very lucky to have met the right people who have helped me, who saw something in me. But you know that saying, you make your own luck? As corny as that sounds, I see a lot of wisdom in that. And to elaborate on that a little bit more, I really like the saying, you plant the seeds of your serendipitous encounters. And I just find this concept so compelling, especially in ways that it's manifested in my life. Like, I just think it's a really nice way of looking at the world, that every moment you could possibly meet someone or see something that could have a serious impact in your life. I hope you enjoyed this video, and of course, there's tons of things that I didn't cover and tons of questions that I didn't answer. But I have an email newsletter where I share some of my lessons and insights. So if you're interested, you can sign up at damilee.com/newsletter. I'll leave the link in the description. Also, let me know if you have any questions in the comments and I'll try to get to them ASAP. If you're interested in this life lesson type videos, check out this video where I wrap up my biggest lessons I learned from 2021, which was an insanely transformative year for me. All right, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.